It begins like any ordinary Tuesday until suddenly it changes forever. A black woman steps into the Atlanta federal courthouse, composed and confident, completely unaware that she's about to face discrimination from those who are meant to uphold justice. They assume she's nobody important. They disrespect her, violate her dignity, and mock her throughout the process. What they fail to realize is that they've just mistreated the one person who has the legal authority to hold them accountable. What follows is a powerful storm of justice, revelation, and a courtroom twist that completely reverses the power dynamic. Keep watching. You won't believe what happens next. And please tell us where you're viewing from in the comments below. The clock had just struck 9:15 a.m. when Victoria Washington climbed out of her dark blue sedan and walked up the wide marble steps of the Atlanta federal courthouse. The Georgia sunshine beat down through the tall oak trees, creating dappled shadows across the pathway. She adjusted her charcoal gray blazer, squared her shoulders confidently, and held a thin black portfolio in one hand. Her heels made a steady rhythm against the stone as she approached the entrance, each step purposeful and assured. Victoria never wore her judicial robes outside the courtroom. It was her personal policy. She preferred to enter each building as an ordinary citizen, quietly observing how the system treated people when they didn't know who held the power. But today, she wouldn't be welcomed as Judge Washington. She wouldn't even be treated with basic respect. Today, she would be seen as just another black woman entering a place where authority had historically been difficult to claim. At the security checkpoint, the atmosphere immediately shifted as she approached. Officer Greg Thompson, a courthouse security officer known for his rigid attitude and outdated perspectives, narrowed his eyes as she neared the metal detectors. He didn't recognize her, and more importantly, he made no effort to. He stepped forward with his arms crossed over his chest and held up a gloved hand to stop her. "Ma'am," he said gruffly, "you need to step out of this line right now." Victoria paused briefly, maintaining her composure. "Is there a problem, officer?" Thompson didn't respond immediately. His gaze moved slowly over her, from her short, natural curls to her pressed slacks to the steady confidence in her expression. Something about her presence seemed to irritate him. She carried herself like she belonged in this courthouse, and in his worldview, people like her needed constant reminders about who really controlled access. No visible identification. "You can't just walk into a federal building looking like that," he muttered dismissively. Victoria calmly reached into her blazer pocket and produced her federal judicial credentials. The badge gleamed under the overhead lights, but Thompson barely glanced at it. He took it from her hand, gave it a cursory look, then slipped it into his pocket without returning it. She raised an eyebrow questioningly. "I would like that returned to me, officer." He moved closer, invading her personal space. "Are you in some kind of rush, honey?" The condescending term struck her like a verbal slap. A second security officer, a younger woman, shifted uncomfortably by the scanning equipment. She clearly recognized the tension developing but remained silent, watching the interaction without intervention. "I need to reach my courtroom," Victoria stated firmly. "Then you'll follow my procedures," Thompson snapped back. "And that includes random security checks. Let's go." He didn't give her time to respond. With one heavy hand gripping her upper arm, he steered her toward a side corridor away from the main security line, into a windowless screening room just beyond the checkpoint. The air inside was stuffy and still. There was a metal chair positioned in the center, a cart with scanning equipment, and a pair of scissors sitting ominously on the edge of a desk. Victoria's heartbeat quickened, but her expression remained calm. "I do not consent to this detainment," she said clearly. "You have no legal justification to hold me here." "You're acting suspicious," he replied, gesturing toward the chair. "That's more than enough reason. Sit down." She remained standing. He leaned in closer to her face. "You think that credential you flashed means something? Not in here. Not to me." Without warning, 2 additional officers entered the room. One of them, a man in his early 30s with a clean-shaven head and nervous eyes, grabbed her right wrist. Another held the other side of the chair. Victoria's voice rose slightly. "This is a violation of my rights. I want all of your names and badge numbers." but no one responded to her request. Instead, Thompson picked up the scissors from the desk. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Standard protocol," he replied casually. "You could be hiding something in that hair," he said, gesturing toward her natural curls. Victoria attempted to stand, but a firm hand pushed her back down. The scissors made a metallic snipping sound as they opened and closed. Before she could react further, she felt the cold metal touch her scalp. One thick curl of her hair fell to the floor, then another and another. She caught her breath but refused to cry out. She didn't scream. She didn't even blink. She sat perfectly still as her dignity was stripped away strand by strand, watching pieces of her identity collect in piles on the tiled floor. Laughter echoed from one of the guards. "She does look more professional now," he commented. "Should have entered with some respect in the first place," Thompson said, brushing loose hair from his sleeve. "Now you look more presentable for whatever business you think you have here." Victoria's hands tightened into fists in her lap, her knuckles showing the strain, but her voice when she finally spoke remained steady and controlled. "You will regret this action," she said quietly. He leaned down with a smirk. "People like you always make empty threats." And then, as abruptly as it had begun, it ended. Thompson opened the door and gestured back toward the main hallway. "You're free to continue now. Courtrooms are that direction," he said mockingly. Victoria rose slowly, her hands trembling only slightly with suppressed anger. She retrieved her badge from Thompson's desk without asking permission and walked out into the corridor. Her steps were measured, her expression unreadable. But inside her chest, something burned hotter than rage and deeper than humiliation. It was resolute purpose, and in just a few minutes that purpose would change everything. Because what Officer Thompson didn't realize was this crucial fact. She wasn't there to observe proceedings. She wasn't there as a defendant. She wasn't there to be judged by anyone else. She was Judge Victoria Washington, and she was about to take her rightful place on the bench. The sound of scissors echoed in Victoria's ears long after she had left that cold, windowless room. Each step she took toward the courtroom felt heavier than the last, not out of fear, but from controlled anger held tightly in check. Her scalp tingled where her hair had once proudly grown, natural curls that had taken years to nurture, rooted in heritage, in identity, in self-acceptance. Now, gone. Uneven patches were all that remained of her crown. The hallway seemed unnaturally quiet as Victoria passed several clerks who glanced at her, then quickly averted their eyes. They had heard something. Perhaps they had even seen what happened, but not one of them had spoken up or intervened. She continued walking without breaking her stride, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her composure crack. Down the corridor, a low hum of voices filtered through the heavy wooden doors of Courtroom 4. It was a significant morning on the docket. A police misconduct hearing involving several officers accused of excessive force during last year's civil rights demonstration. National media attention. Heavy press coverage. Originally, Victoria was supposed to enter through her private chambers where her robe would be waiting, staff prepared, and all protocols observed. But today, those plans no longer mattered. She paused momentarily outside the courtroom doors, took one deep breath to center herself, then pushed both doors open wide. The courtroom immediately fell silent. Conversations halted mid-sentence, heads turned in her direction, and then the realization began to spread through the room like a wave. Her shoes clicked loudly against the polished floor as she walked past rows of attorneys, journalists, plaintiffs, and defendants. Some stared in confusion, others in dawning disbelief as she approached the front of the room. Behind the judge's bench, her chair sat empty, waiting. And then it hit them all at once. The woman they had watched being escorted through the hallway like a criminal, the woman whose scalp showed the evidence of humiliation, was not a victim of circumstance. She was the judge assigned to this high-profile case. Judge Victoria Washington stepped behind the bench and turned slowly to face the packed courtroom. Her expression remained composed, almost unnaturally calm, the kind of calm that comes not from peace but from absolute clarity of purpose. Someone near the defense table dropped a pen. the small sound magnified in the stunned silence. Officer Thompson, the same man who had held the scissors in his hand minutes earlier, stood frozen by the side door. When her eyes met his, he went completely still. The blood visibly drained from his face. His lips parted, but no sound emerged. Victoria didn't flinch or react. Instead, she reached for the black robe folded neatly on the arm of her chair. She didn't ask for assistance. She didn't wait for any ceremonial announcement. She put it on herself with deliberate, unhurried movements. It settled onto her shoulders like armor against the world. She turned to the court clerk. "Is today's docket prepared?" she asked, her voice steady and professional. The clerk's voice cracked slightly as she responded, "Yes, Your Honor." Victoria nodded once, then lowered herself into her chair, the leather creaking softly beneath her weight. She looked straight ahead, her gaze passing over Officer Thompson without direct acknowledgement. "Not yet. We will begin today with preliminary testimony in Case 4682B, United States v. Atlanta Police Department," she announced as if nothing unusual had occurred. "Charges include abuse of power, excessive force, and civil rights violations. Are all parties present?" A murmured chorus of "Yes, Your Honor" echoed back to her. The attorneys shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some appeared wide-eyed with shock, others looked guilty by association, and a few seemed visibly angry that a black woman had dared to walk back in after what they assumed would have crushed her spirit. She disregarded all of their reactions. "We will proceed as scheduled." The first witness called was an officer who had been on duty during the protest in question, a man who had allegedly pushed an elderly veteran to the ground during a peaceful demonstration, causing several broken bones. Victoria listened attentively, took precise notes, but asked no clarifying questions. Not yet. From her peripheral vision, she could see Thompson gradually backing toward the rear exit of the courtroom. His hands fidgeted nervously at his belt. His legs seemed restless, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He looked desperate to disappear, like he instinctively knew his moment of reckoning was approaching, and he was absolutely right to be concerned. After the second witness finished testifying, she called for a brief recess. The courtroom emptied quickly, almost too quickly, as if everyone inside could feel the tension building and needed air. Victoria remained seated, perfectly still. After several minutes, when only her clerk, 2 court officers, and Thompson remained in the room, she finally looked directly at him. "Officer Thompson," she said, her voice sharp as broken glass. He froze mid-step. "Step forward." His mouth opened, stammering nervously. Yes, Your Honor." She motioned to the open center of the courtroom. He obeyed, moving like someone approaching the edge of a cliff. "State your full name for the record," she commanded. He blinked rapidly, confused. "Excuse me? You heard what I said. Gregory Thompson. How long have you been employed as a security officer at this courthouse?" 11 years, Your Honor." She tapped her pen methodically against her legal pad. Once. Twice. Then she leaned forward slightly. "And in those 11 years, how many women have you assaulted in that screening room?" The color drained from his face. Your Honor, I didn't know who you—" "That wasn't my question, Officer Thompson." He looked around desperately for support. None came. "How many formal complaints have been filed against you during your tenure here?" I don't have an exact number," he stammered. Victoria's voice rose, not in volume, but in precision. 17. 17 formal complaints, all buried, all dismissed, because you hid behind protocol and procedure. His mouth trembled visibly now. "I didn't recognize who you were. I thought—" "And that's precisely the problem, isn't it?" she interrupted sharply, her voice cracking the silence of the room. "You thought I was nobody, just another black woman you could intimidate, humiliate, and degrade without consequences." The room remained absolutely silent as she continued. "You didn't even bother to check my identification properly." Thompson tried to speak, but no coherent sound came out. Victoria rose from behind the bench. "Because of your actions today, this courthouse, this supposed temple of justice, has been compromised. Because of what you've done, the integrity of this entire court is now in question. and because you assaulted a federal judge in her own courthouse, you are now the subject of a criminal investigation, effective immediately." She turned to the officers standing by the exit. "Escort Officer Thompson into custody. Keep him separated from general population. Formal charges will follow shortly." The officers moved swiftly, handcuffs already prepared. "Wait! Wait! You can't do this!" Thompson shouted desperately, but he was completely wrong. She not only could, she already had. This was more than justice for one incident. This was accountability finally catching up to years of unchecked abuse. Before we continue to the final part of this powerful story, I'd love to connect with you, our amazing viewers. If you're enjoying this video and believe in the importance of sharing stories about justice and accountability, please hit that subscribe button right now. Our channel is dedicated to bringing you real stories that matter, and your support allows us to keep creating this meaningful content. Now, I have a question for you that's a little different from what other channels might ask. What moment in your life made you realize that appearances can be deceiving? Was there a time when someone underestimated you because of how you looked? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might inspire others who are facing similar challenges. I read every comment personally, and your stories help shape future videos on this channel. Now, let's get back to Judge Washington's powerful story of accountability and see how this courthouse reckoning unfolds. Here's the final block of the script. The courtroom no longer felt like a typical federal court after what had just transpired. Officer Gregory Thompson, once a fixture of intimidation and control in that courthouse, was now gone, escorted out in handcuffs by two silent officers. His badge had been surrendered, his authority completely stripped away, but the aftershocks of his removal still lingered throughout the room. It hung in the air like static electricity, present in the unusual silence, in the way the ceiling fans seemed to hum too loudly, in the uncomfortable glances exchanged between staff members who had known about the abuses for years but had said nothing. Judge Victoria Washington sat back in her chair, fingers interlaced on the bench before her, her judicial robe now draped over her like protective armor. There was no possibility of returning to business as usual, and, truthfully, she had no desire to, because something fundamental had shifted. Not just within her, but within the entire system of that courthouse. Her clerk entered quietly, holding a fresh stack of court documents. "Your Honor," she said cautiously, "the next group of witnesses is being prepared now. How much time do we have?" Victoria nodded slightly. "About 10 minutes." She looked past her clerk, out into the now empty gallery with its rows of wooden benches where jurors, journalists, and the public would return at any moment. Yet she could still feel Thompson's presence lingering like a dark stain on polished marble. She exhaled slowly and deliberately. This day had already defied every expectation, and it was barely noon. The door creaked open behind her. Victoria turned to see a young woman entering, perhaps early 20s with glasses that had fogged slightly from rushing through the building. One of the court interns named Ashley, intelligent and observant, but who rarely spoke unless directly addressed. She appeared visibly shaken. Victoria acknowledged her with a small nod. "Is everything all right?" Ashley hesitated briefly, then closed the door behind her and stepped forward. I wanted to tell you that I saw what happened earlier this morning with Officer Thompson, outside the screening room," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know what to do. I should have said something or intervened somehow. I was afraid of what might happen." Victoria didn't answer immediately. She simply studied the young woman's trembling hands. Then she said gently, "Thank you for telling me now. That takes courage." "I didn't stop it from happening," Ashley replied, her voice edged with shame. "No," Victoria acknowledged, "but you're speaking up now. That's more than most people have done." Ashley looked like she might cry, but she squared her shoulders resolutely and added, "If you need someone to testify about what I saw, I'm willing to do that." Victoria reached across the desk and briefly placed her hand over the young woman's. No words, just a moment of human connection and solidarity. Then the courtroom doors creaked open again, this time with the heavier sound of the public returning. Victoria stood as the room began to fill. "All rise. the clerk called out, her voice steadier than before. Everyone in the courtroom stood, even those who clearly resented having to do so. Even those who had previously laughed at Thompson's offensive jokes behind closed doors. Victoria resumed her seat with poise. Court is now back in session. As the next witness took the stand, the atmosphere in the room had subtly but profoundly changed. The balance of power was no longer ambiguous. This wasn't merely a hearing anymore. It had become a reckoning. The witness was a black father named Marcus Jenkins, approximately 42 years old, a construction supervisor with flecks of gray in his closely trimmed beard and hands roughened from decades of physical labor. His eyes reflected deep weariness but unwavering determination. He was there to testify about how his 16-year-old son had been thrown to the ground and pinned during a peaceful demonstration by some of the same officers now seated at the defense table. One of them had pressed his knee against the teenager's throat, restricting his airway. The boy survived, thankfully, but still experienced difficulty speaking above a whisper. This had happened 8 months ago. Marcus sat on the witness stand and recounted everything: how they had desperately called for medical assistance, how they were dismissively told, "He's fine, he's just pretending," how their pleas were ignored by every authority figure present, and how, even when video footage of the incident eventually surfaced, not one of the officers involved faced any disciplinary action. Victoria didn't interrupt him once. She didn't need to, because every word the man spoke cut through the courtroom like a blade, leaving no one untouched by the raw truth of his testimony. When he finished speaking, Victoria leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Jenkins, thank you for your courage today. I know this isn't easy for you or your family." He nodded, his voice breaking slightly. "I just want to know that it meant something, that someone with authority is finally listening to us." Victoria looked at him not as a judge peering down from a bench, but as someone who intimately understood what it felt like to be silenced and dismissed. "You have been heard today," she assured him quietly. Several minutes later, after he had stepped down and walked slowly past the officers who had nearly taken his son's life, Victoria called for another brief recess. Her private chambers felt unnaturally quiet, almost too quiet. She sat for a moment, staring at her reflection in the small mirror above the sink, her uneven hair, the raw patch visible just above her left ear. The woman looking back at her didn't resemble the typical image of a federal judge. She looked like someone who had just survived a battle. But perhaps that was precisely what justice required. Not a performance of detached authority, but a willingness to fight for truth, something she had absolutely no intention of abandoning now. There was a firm knock at her door. Her clerk opened it halfway. "Your Honor, the U.S. Attorney's Office just submitted a sealed motion. They want to escalate charges against Thompson immediately, citing violations of federal civil rights statutes." Victoria didn't hesitate. "Good, accept the filing." As the door closed again, she finally allowed herself a single deep breath, not out of relief, but from renewed resolve. This day was far from over. The courtroom might have witnessed Thompson's removal, but they hadn't yet seen the full extent of what was coming. The real systemic reckoning had only just begun. The courtroom was completely full when proceedings resumed, but it wasn't the same environment anymore. Something fundamental had shifted in the atmosphere. It hung in the air like the charged stillness before a powerful storm, creating a weight that made people sit straighter in their chairs, speak more quietly, and reconsider their assumptions about who truly held power in that space. Judge Victoria Washington returned to the bench with a presence that commanded immediate attention. No bailiff announced her this time. No ceremonial flourish, just the sound of her measured footsteps against the hardwood floor and the quiet rustle of her robe as she took her seat. Everyone rose instinctively at her entrance. She didn't speak immediately. She simply surveyed the room. The defendants, the press representatives, the attorneys, and the silent crowd of observers who had returned, many still wide-eyed from what they had witnessed earlier. They were all waiting to see what would happen next, how far she would go, whether this would be merely a momentary display or the beginning of lasting change. She tapped her gavel once. "Court is now in session," she stated. The room settled into attentive silence. She turned her attention to the attorneys seated at the prosecution table. Call your next witness, please." The room hushed again as an officer, Captain James Reynolds, was sworn in. He was tall and solidly built, with the rigid posture of someone who believed his badge placed him beyond questioning. He sat down, cleared his throat professionally, and folded his hands in his lap. Victoria studied him closely for a long moment. She recognized the type: polished, proud, and practiced at providing answers that revealed nothing while sounding authoritative. The prosecutor began her questioning methodically. "Captain Reynolds, you were present at the demonstration on March 8th of last year, correct?" "Yes, ma'am." "And during that time, you supervised a team of 8 officers?" "That's correct." "Did you personally authorize the use of force against protesters?" Reynolds leaned slightly toward the microphone, speaking with the practiced tone of someone giving a press statement. "I authorized necessary crowd control measures after protesters became increasingly aggressive. There was shouting, pushing, and some individuals were armed with bottles and other projectiles." "Were any injuries reported among your officers?" "No, ma'am." "And the injuries sustained by protesters?" "Minor, for the most part. Primarily bruises and scrapes." Victoria's voice cut through the exchange before the prosecutor could continue. "Captain Reynolds." He turned toward her. "Yes, Your Honor? Do you consider a crushed windpipe to be a minor injury?" The question hung suspended in the charged air. Well, no, ma'am, of course not." Victoria leaned forward slightly. "Then why did your official incident report describe it as minor soft tissue trauma consistent with resisting officers?" Reynolds shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "That's standard terminology in our reporting protocols. It was based on preliminary assessments at the scene." "Preliminary assessments from whom?" He adjusted his tie nervously. "I believe it was Officer Dawson who completed that section of the report." Victoria maintained unwavering eye contact with him. "And did you review and approve that language yourself?" A brief pause followed. Then, "Yes, Your Honor." Knowing that the victim was a 16-year-old unarmed minor, Reynolds opened his mouth, closed it, then finally answered, "Yes." Her tone remained perfectly measured. "Do you believe justice was properly served that day, Captain?" Silence filled the room. I believe we followed established protocols," he finally responded. She sat back slightly in her chair. "That wasn't my question." Reynolds cleared his throat again. "With respect, Your Honor, I can't answer that. It's not my role to determine—" "No," she interrupted calmly. "It's mine." She turned back to the prosecution. "You may proceed with your questioning." The remainder of the testimony was technical and procedural, but every statement now landed with the weight of undeniable truth. It wasn't just about the facts being presented. It was about the way these officers had normalized injustice, making it sound reasonable, routine, acceptable. When the next recess was called, the gallery buzzed with whispers. Reporters typed frantically on their laptops. Advocacy groups took detailed notes. A woman near the back of the room silently mouthed, "Thank you," as Victoria walked past her on the way to chambers. In her private office, Victoria carefully removed her robe and hung it on the wooden stand. She stared at it for a moment longer than usual. How ordinary it looked hanging there, so plain and harmless. Yet out in that courtroom, that same robe carried immense significance. It transformed everything. When she wore it, people stood for her. They listened attentively. They recognized her authority. But just 3 hours earlier, wearing the same face, the same heart, the same dignity, but without the robe, she had been assaulted and degraded as if she were nothing. That stark contradiction now lived within her consciousness. It burned behind her eyes and pulsed through her veins with every heartbeat. There was another knock at her door. "Your Honor," her clerk called through the wood. "There's someone here to speak with you from the Department of Justice. They say it's urgent." Victoria straightened her posture. "Send them in." A woman in a crisp charcoal suit stepped confidently through the doorway. Composed and professional, she handed over a sealed envelope. "Judge Washington, I'm with the Office of Civil Rights. I was dispatched immediately when reports surfaced about this morning's incident." "Remarkably quick response," Victoria noted, unfolding the official letter. "This courthouse is now under comprehensive federal review," the representative explained. What happened in that screening room goes beyond misconduct. It's a clear violation of Title 18 protections, and now that we know the victim was a federal judge—" She trailed off, leaving the implications unspoken. Victoria didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The woman continued without prompting. "We're launching an immediate investigation into Atlanta District Courthouse personnel, previously filed complaints, potential suppression of reports, and any obstruction of justice." "Good," Victoria said quietly. "Begin with the supervisors who buried those 17 complaints against Thompson, then examine which judges signed off on dismissing them." The representative nodded as if she had anticipated this exact suggestion. "Oh, and Judge Washington," she added, pausing at the doorway. "You should know that footage of this morning's incident has spread across all major platforms. It's everywhere: CNN, MSNBC, social media. Even several senators are discussing it publicly." Victoria gave the slightest shake of her head. "I didn't do this for publicity." The woman smiled knowingly. "No, that's precisely why it matters so much." When the representative departed, Victoria sank slowly into her chair. Beyond her door, in the courtroom, the next group of defense attorneys were gathering. She could already hear their shoes against the floor, the nervous shuffling of papers, the last-minute whispered consultations between counsel. The fight for justice was far from over, but she was fully prepared for whatever came next, because today wasn't simply about exposing one prejudiced security officer. It was about tearing the mask off an entire corrupted system. And the process of dismantling it had only just begun. Thank you so much for watching this powerful story of justice and accountability. If you found value in today's video, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. It truly helps us continue sharing these important narratives that often go untold. I'm genuinely curious. What part of Judge Washington's story resonated most deeply with you? Was it her courage in the face of humiliation, her commitment to transforming injustice into accountability, or perhaps the message that true change requires both personal courage and institutional reform? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters and helps build our community. If you've experienced or witnessed similar situations where speaking truth to power made a difference, we'd be honored to hear your story too. Every experience shared helps others feel less alone in their struggles. And remember, by engaging with content like this, you're helping amplify voices and stories that need to be heard. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. Together, we can inspire meaningful change one story at a time.